In the heart of the bustling city, nestled between the towering skyscrapers, there was a little cafe that everyone knew. It was the sort of place where the hum of conversation mixed with the hiss of the espresso machine, where the smell of roasted coffee beans danced on the air like an old, comforting song. The walls were lined with quirky art, and the windows, though small, framed the lively street outside with a perfect view. And then, of course, there was Jordan, the barista, sharp-eyed, quick-witted and proud of his craft. He had a reputation in the cafe for serving up more than just good coffee. He served attitude, a bit of flair, and a touch of sarcasm to keep things interesting. But there was one thing Jordan had absolutely no patience for: farmers. You see, he thought they were all the same, stubborn, smelly, and completely out of place in his pristine little cafe. It wasn't that Jordan disliked them as people. No. He just didn't understand why anyone would trade the freedom of the city for the dirt and labor of the country. So, when the farmer walked through the door that chilly morning, with his thick boots caked in mud and a wide-brimmed hat that seemed a little too large for his frame, Jordan's lip curled slightly. He eyed the man from behind the counter with disdain. "Here we go again," Jordan thought, rolling his eyes. The farmer approached the counter slowly, his weathered face creased, with lines that spoke of decades spent working the land. His hands, calloused and rough, gripped a faded leather bag. He didn't speak immediately, just looked around the cafe, scanning the polished wood tables and the smooth, shining espresso machine. The atmosphere was so different from his farm, and yet he seemed oddly at ease. "Can I help you?" Jordan asked, his voice just the right mix of polite and dismissive. The farmer cleared his throat, eyeing the menu on the wall above the counter. "I'll have a cup of your finest coffee, son," he said with a calmness that threw Jordan off guard. The words were simple enough, but it was the way the farmer spoke, with a certain gravity in his voice, that piqued Jordan's curiosity. Still, he didn't let on. "No problem," Jordan replied, his tone cold. "But I've got to warn you, we're a bit more high-end than you're used to around here. This isn't your local diner, and we don't serve drip coffee." The farmer's lips quirked in the faintest smile, but he nodded, not taken aback by Jordan's arrogance. He didn't reply right away, instead taking a step forward. His gaze lingered on Jordan for a moment, and Jordan felt a flicker of unease, an unspoken tension, like something was off, but he couldn't quite place it. Then the farmer spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "You sure about that, son?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Jordan froze, momentarily caught in the older man's gaze. A surge of something unidentifiable washed over him, but before he could process it, he shook it off and turned to prepare the coffee, thinking little more of it. But what Jordan didn't realize as he fumbled with the espresso machine was that the man standing before him wasn't just a farmer. No, this man was someone far more significant than Jordan could ever imagine, someone who would soon turn his entire world upside down. The moment was ordinary, almost too much so for the events that would soon follow. Jordan turned his back. To the farmer, hands busy with the espresso machine, steam rising like a thin veil of smoke between him and the man at the counter. The hiss of the milk frother seemed to fill the silence as the farmer remained unmoved, waiting. But then, there, it was, a single word. I said, "You sure about that?" The farmer's voice was firm now, with a quiet intensity that made the air crackle. Jordan's hand faltered, the milk frothing a little too quickly, bubbles beginning to rise beyond the rim of the pitcher. His heartbeat quickened, his annoyance flaring. Who does this guy think he is? The more Jordan thought about it, the more he felt the prickle of irritation on his skin. He turned slowly, a forced smile creeping across his face as he wiped his hands on his apron. "Listen, if you're looking for something basic, there's a diner down the block. We're not really in the business of serving people who don't know what they're asking for." The farmer didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, his eyes sharpened, his lips turning into a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite match the serenity in his gaze. "I don't think you're hearing me right, son," he said, his voice softer but layered with an undeniable weight. "I know what I'm asking for." Jordan stiffened, his patience wearing thin. This wasn't some philosophical back and forth. This was a coffee order, his cafe, his rules. The farmer clearly wasn't from around here, and Jordan didn't like being questioned by someone who didn't understand the hustle of city life. "You don't belong here," Jordan muttered under his breath, though the words were meant more for himself than for the farmer. His irritation had morphed into a sharp, almost cruel defensiveness. "That so?" The farmer's voice lowered again, like the rumble of distant thunder. He stepped closer, and Jordan felt something tighten in his chest. Was this guy really going to push back like this? Before Jordan could reply, his coworker Olivia came from the back. A fresh-faced college student with a perpetual optimism about her, Olivia stepped in between them with a knowing smile. "Everything okay, Jordan?" Jordan blinked, trying to recover. Olivia had been working at the cafe for a few months now, and, while she admired his confidence, she often found herself caught in the middle of his more aggressive moments. The farmer took a step back, his gaze moving between them both before he spoke. Quieter now, almost a whisper. "Maybe I'll just take my coffee somewhere else." The words should have been dismissed easily, but they stung more than they should have, leaving Jordan unsettled. As the farmer turned to leave, the weight of his presence seemed to linger in the air. Something had shifted in that brief exchange, but Jordan couldn't pinpoint what. But Olivia's gaze followed the man out the door, her curiosity piqued. "What do you think that was about?" she asked, her tone light but uncertain. Jordan shook his head, shrugging off the encounter. "Nothing. Just another weird customer. It's no big deal." Yet, deep inside, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't just a farmer. He felt like someone who had crossed into Jordan's world for a reason, and that something was about to change. The day dragged on, and Jordan tried his best to ignore the strange encounter from earlier. The cafe was crowded, as usual, filled with the usual clattering of cups, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional sip of satisfaction. But Jordan's mind kept drifting back to that farmer's words. "You sure about that?" They echoed, in his thoughts, clashing with the rhythmic pulse of the cafe. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the man than what met the eye, yet, as much as he tried to focus on the job at hand, the unease was undeniable. Olivia noticed. She was always perceptive that way, picking up on the shifts in Jordan's mood, even when he tried to hide them. "Something's bothering you," she remarked as she wiped down a table, her voice soft but unyielding. Jordan forced a smile, though it was thin and fragile. "I'm fine. Just one of those days." But Olivia didn't buy it. "Is it about that farmer?" she pressed. Jordan bristled at the mention of the man. The last thing he wanted was to relive that exchange. "I don't know. Just felt off, you know? Like he knew something I didn't." Olivia, ever the optimist, chuckled. "Come on, Jordan. He was just an old guy who wanted a coffee. You've had worse customers, haven't you?" Jordan's jaw tightened as he turned away from her, pretending to focus on the coffee machine. But her words cut deeper than she realized. Had he really just been an old guy? Jordan's mind churned with doubt. The unsettling feeling didn't fade. It only seemed to grow stronger, a gnawing itch he couldn't scratch. Hours passed. The cafe buzzed with activity. Then, just when Jordan thought he might finally shake off the unease, the door swung open again. The bell above it jingled, and in stepped the same farmer. This time, though, something had shifted in the air. The man wasn't alone. Behind him, a sleek black car pulled up outside, the engine rumbling ominously. A man in a sharp suit, dark sunglasses, and an air of authority stepped out. He scanned the cafe for a moment, his eyes lingering on Jordan before he spoke to the farmer in low tones. Jordan's curiosity flickered, but he tried to dismiss it. Just more weirdness, nothing more. But when the farmer stepped up to the counter, this time, he didn't ask for coffee, he didn't need to. "I'll take the usual," the farmer said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something far more serious. Jordan blinked, confusion setting in. "The usual?" He glanced at Olivia, who was now looking over with concern. "What are you talking about?" The farmer's eyes locked onto Jordan's, his gaze unwavering, piercing. "What you don't realize, son, is that you're about to be part of something much bigger than your cafe." For a split second, Jordan's stomach dropped, a cold wave of panic crashing over him. This wasn't just some ordinary guy. Something had changed, and Jordan knew deep down that the simple rhythm of his life, his safe, predictable world, was slipping away. As Olivia approached the counter, sensing the shift in energy, the man in the suit stepped forward, handing Jordan a letter sealed with an elegant emblem. He didn't speak, only nodded to the farmer, who offered Jordan a final, cryptic smile. Jordan's hand shook slightly as he took the letter, feeling the weight of it more than he could explain. The world outside seemed to close in, the noise of the cafe fading into a dull hum. "Open it!" Olivia urged, her voice laced with concern and curiosity. Jordan glanced down at the envelope, his pulse quickening. What had he just gotten himself into? And in that moment, the cafe, his sanctuary, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. The letter trembled in Jordan's hands, the elegant seal glowing in the dim light of the cafe. He could feel the weight of it. A message that somehow carried the gravity of 1,000 unspoken words. Olivia's hand hovered beside his, her curiosity a silent pressure that nudged him toward a decision he wasn't sure he was ready to make. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan's breath hitched. His thumb ran over the embossed emblem. Something about it felt familiar, though he couldn't place it. He glanced up at the farmer who stood by the door, still calm, still watching. "Open it," Olivia repeated, almost insistently, as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. With a deep, unsteady breath, Jordan cracked the seal. His fingers slid beneath the parchment, and he unfolded the letter slowly, a sense of dread building in his chest. The paper felt old, the ink dark, almost too polished for a simple note. As his eyes scanned the message, his heart pounded in his ears, and the world around him seemed to blur. The words on the page felt like they were pulling him in, pushing against everything he thought he knew. "Jordan Parker, the time has come for you to fulfill your role. There are forces at play you cannot yet comprehend, and your involvement is critical to what is about to unfold. We have watched you, and we know you possess what is needed. You are not who you think you are, nor is this cafe the sanctuary you believe it to be. Everything you know is a lie. But you have a choice. Accept the truth, or continue your life as it is, blind to the bigger picture. Meet me at the old mill on Route 7 at midnight. Bring nothing but your mind. The answers await. Yours sincerely, the..." Farmer Jordan's hand shook violently as he read the last line. He blinked several times, but the words didn't change. His pulse throbbed in his throat. His mind spun wildly, trying to make sense of what he'd just read. What does this mean? What is this about? The old mill? He could feel Olivia's gaze. On him, her eyes wide with concern and confusion. "Jordan, what's going on? Who sent this?" But Jordan couldn't answer. The world outside the cafe seemed to shrink, the people talking in the background fading into nothing. The letter, its cryptic message, was like a knife lodged deep inside him, twisting in a way that made him question everything. His life, his choices, his very existence. He looked back at the farmer, who stood motionless by the door, his presence now undeniably commanding. "Who are you?" Jordan managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper, though his chest tightened with every word. The farmer's lips curled upward into a knowing smile, but there was something there, something dark and resolute that caught Jordan off guard. "You'll know soon enough, son. But for now, you have a choice. Time's running out, and the world outside your cafe is much bigger than you think." Olivia's eyes flicked between them, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Jordan, what are you going to do?" Jordan felt his mind spiraling. The weight of the letter, of the farmer's words, pressed down on him, suffocating him. He wanted to laugh it off, to tell Olivia that it was some joke, some prank. But the way the man had spoken, the way he held himself, the look in his eyes, it was too real. "Who are you?" Jordan repeated, this time his voice cracking under the pressure. The farmer took a step forward, his eyes intense. "I'm someone who's here to wake you up, Jordan. I'm someone who's about to turn your world upside down. If you're ready to face what comes next, you'll meet me tonight. But if you're not..." He shrugged slightly, almost as if it didn't matter either way. "The choice is yours." Jordan's breath hitched, and for the first time in years, he felt truly afraid. His entire life had been contained in this cafe, in these walls. The routine, the rhythm, the safety of knowing what to expect every single day. But now, all of it was in question. What if this was real? What if he wasn't just a barista? The tension that gripped his chest now was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The clock on the wall ticked, reminding him that time was running out. Tonight, midnight, the old mill. Olivia, seeing the storm in his eyes, placed a hand gently on his arm. "Jordan, don't do anything crazy." But it was too late. Something inside him had shifted. Jordan had no idea what awaited him, but one thing was certain. His world, his predictable little existence, was about to change. And there was no going back. "I'm going," he said quietly, a determination creeping into his voice that he didn't recognize. He folded the letter carefully, shoving it into his pocket, and for the first time in a long while, Jordan felt the sting of a choice that would lead him somewhere far beyond the coffee machine and the walls of his small cafe. The night air was cold and biting as Jordan stood at the edge of the old mill on Route 7. The towering structure loomed before him, its weathered wooden beams creaking in the wind, a relic of a past long forgotten. It was as if the entire world had shifted beneath his feet the moment he'd left the cafe, the steady rhythm of his life now replaced by an unsettling tension that pulsed in every nerve of his body. He had no idea what to expect, but something deep inside him told him this was it, the moment that would alter everything. His heart raced as the seconds dragged on, the darkness wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. The faint sound of footsteps broke the silence, and Jordan's breath hitched. He turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing into the shadows. The farmer stepped from the darkness, his broad silhouette emerging from the night like a figure from a dream. His movements were slow, deliberate, and Jordan could feel the weight of his presence before he even spoke. "You came," the farmer said, his voice steady but laced with a note of approval. There was no humor in his tone now, no warmth, just a cold, undeniable truth in his words. "I wasn't sure you would." Jordan swallowed, his throat dry. His mind reeled from the letter, the promises, the cryptic warnings. This wasn't just about some ridiculous coffee order anymore. This was something much bigger, something that felt like the very fabric of his life was unraveling before his eyes. "You said I had a choice," Jordan finally said, his voice shaking despite his efforts to sound confident. "But I don't understand. What is this all about? Who are you?" The farmer's eyes glinted in the dim light, unreadable but somehow filled with knowledge, that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. "You're not who you think you are, Jordan," he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning. "You never have been." A chill ran down Jordan's spine. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the farmer's face, desperate for some sort of explanation. The air seemed to press in on him, suffocating, and for a moment he considered turning around, running back to the cafe, back to safety. But something held him in place, a force, a pull, that wouldn't let him go. The farmer reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, weathered object, holding it up between them. It was an old brass key worn from years of use, but its edges were still sharp and glinting in the moonlight. "This is your key," the farmer said, his voice thick with the weight of history. "To everything. To who you really are." Jordan stared at the key, his mind racing. But the pieces weren't fitting together. "What do you mean?" he asked again, his voice a whisper now, almost pleading. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. The farmer's gaze softened just for a moment, as if he were looking at a lost child. "Your father, he was more than just a farmer. He was part of something much larger, something hidden from the world. And you, Jordan, you have a role to play. You always have." The words hit Jordan like a physical blow. His father. But he had never known his father beyond the stories his mother had told him. A man who had disappeared when Jordan was just a boy, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a legacy buried deep beneath the surface of his life. Jordan had never known the truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jordan's voice cracked, his anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. The farmer took another step forward, his expression grave. "Because you weren't ready. But now you are. The truth has been hidden for far too long, Jordan. It's time you understood why you're here. Why you've always felt like you didn't belong in that cafe. You're meant for more than serving coffee." Jordan's mind whirled, his chest tightening with the weight of the revelation. All the pieces were falling into place, but it was too much to comprehend in the moment. This wasn't just about coffee, it was about something far more dangerous, something hidden in the shadows. "I don't know if I can handle this," Jordan said, his voice strained. "I don't know if I'm ready." The farmer's eyes locked onto his. "You don't have a choice, Jordan. This is your destiny. The cafe was just the beginning. You were always meant for this. And now you have to step up." The farmer extended the key toward him, his hand unwavering. "Take it, and you'll find the answers you seek." Jordan hesitated, the weight of the moment crushing him. But then, slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold brass. The key felt like fire in his hand, like it had been waiting for him all his life. With one final breath, Jordan gripped the key tightly, feeling the shift in the air around him, the pull of a life he never knew he was destined to live. This was no longer about coffee or a cafe. This was about stepping into a world he had never known, and the adventure that awaited him would be unlike anything he could have imagined. Jordan stood in the darkness, the weight of the key in his hand heavier than he could have ever imagined. His heart still raced, the sound of his pulse ringing in his ears, but there was no turning back. He had made his choice, whether he fully understood it or not. The farmer had been right. He wasn't who he thought he was, and the cafe, with its worn counters and familiar hum, had only been a small chapter in a much larger story. The farmer stepped back, a slight nod of approval on his face, as if he had known all along that Jordan would come to this moment. "Now, we move forward," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing, despite the chaos swirling in Jordan's mind. Jordan glanced down at the key, and for the first time, he felt a strange sense of peace settle in his chest. It wasn't fear that gripped him anymore. No, it was anticipation. Something inside him had shifted. This wasn't the end of his journey, but the beginning. The choice to walk away had never been his true path. He had always been destined for something more. His gaze drifted back to the mill, its dark windows now holding a promise of answers. This place, this night, was the start of his real journey, one that would reveal truths he could no longer deny. The letter, the farmer, the mysterious key. They had all been pieces of a puzzle that had only just begun to take shape. Olivia's face flashed in his mind. He could still hear her voice, the concern in her words as she tried to keep him grounded. "Don't do anything crazy." But how could he explain this? How could he put into words the truth he hadn't yet fully grasped himself? With a final glance toward the farmer, Jordan took a deep breath and started toward the mill. The night stretched before him like an open road, unknown and full of possibility. But there was one thing he knew for sure. His life had never truly been his own. Not really. The cafe, the coffee, the routine. It had all been a distraction, a thin veil over the larger picture. The key pulsed in his hand, a constant reminder that whatever lay ahead, it was his destiny to face it. And Jordan, for the first time in his life, felt ready. The door had opened, and the world beyond it beckoned him forward. And so, he stepped into the unknown,